Howie, back here, section 2, unit 2. Alright, we are in photosynthesis unit, and if you guys recall, last section we really talked about the details. By the way, hopefully you're so excited. You're just loving science right now, loving biology. But last week, or should I say just last lesson that you guys viewed, was section 1, where we talked a lot about the details, okay? And you kind of probably thought, why are we learning all of these little things? How do they even fit into photosynthesis? I don't get it. So hopefully today we're going to talk a little bit more about the big picture and kind of what, what this all means when we talk about oxidation, reduction, and just all these laws of thermodynamics and how that all comes to play with actual photosynthesis. But before I really get into that, I need you guys to understand how important photosynthesis is. We take that for granted, and me being even a science teacher, I don't think about it near enough until I start to teach it. And then I realize, wow, we're surrounded by plants and trees and things that give off oxygen and basically allow for life. And you guys will hear next semester when we talk about the early Earth and how it basically came to be what we know it as, is all due to plants and plant life that have basically created our atmosphere and allowed for life to kind of life to appear. So let's talk a little bit more about the big picture, because we talk so many details. So we're going to talk about photosynthesis all section long, actually, and then we're going to get into more stuff in section 3. But before we begin, how about my lovely pictures? Because you guys know I'm a sucker for really cool pictures, and the outdoors, yeah, that's me. So this place, about the greenest place I think you'd ever see. Well, maybe not, but I love forests. You can tell there's a lot of photosynthesis going on, and we'll talk about how I know that. And also, since I'm a huge mountain biker, that just looks like a killer place to go and bike. But nonetheless, lovely pictures. Okay, photosynthesis, baby. Let's move on. You guys are going to see quite a few little video clips within this section, because there are some details that are in your lesson that I'm trying to give you some visuals with my lesson, but also to give you a little bit more visual, I'd like to show you guys some video clips. So here's our first one. Enjoy!
Let's get into this discussion of sunlight and transfer of energy. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this process of chemical reactions. Plants take water, sun, and CO2 to make glucose, the sugar that they use for food. They also put oxygen into the air so we can share, because oxygen is everywhere. The energy transforms from solar to chemical all the time, everywhere. The process is identical in every plant and every tree, enabling all living things to be. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this discussion of sunlight and transfer of energy. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this process of chemical reactions and synergy. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this discussion of sunlight and transfer of energy. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this process of chemical reactions. Let's take a look at the light reaction, making chemical energy when light is captured. Electrons flow through the photosystems, flowing so fast you might have missed them. Within the chloroplast lies the action. The thylakoid membrane is where it happens. ATP and NADPH are products of light, water, air, and space. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this discussion of sunlight and transfer of energy. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this process of chemical reactions and synergy. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this discussion of sunlight and transfer of energy. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this process of chemical reactions. The Calvin cycle, or dark reaction, doesn't need direct sunlight for it to run right. CO2 from the air enters the chloroplast, mixing with organic molecules for the last time with the help of the enzyme Revasco. Carbon fixation, I thought you knew this, yo. It forms a carbohydrate known as G3P. It's created, recreated, and recycled, you see. Photosynthesis, let's get into this discussion of sunlight and transfer of energy. Photosynthesis, let's get into this process of chemical reactions and synergy. Photosynthesis, let's get into this discussion of sunlight and transfer of energy. Photosynthesis, let's get into this process of chemical reactions. Leaves on trees and even weeds meet needs, making oxygen we need to breathe. You wanna learn it with these, you wanna master the keys. It's photosynthesis, listen to this please. Leaves on trees and even weeds meet needs, making oxygen we need to breathe. You wanna learn it with these, you wanna master the keys. It's photosynthesis, listen to this please. Photosynthesis, let's get into this discussion of sunlight and transfer of energy. Photosynthesis, let's get into this process of chemical reaction to synergy. Photosynthesis, let's get into this discussion of sunlight and transfer of energy. Photosynthesis, let's get into this process of chemical reactions.
So you guys will notice that I can't sit still and I like to play obviously songs. You guys notice that there's a little pattern forming, right? So you guys probably just laugh at me because I can't sit here and watch those and not move, and even though I have no dance moves, it's still fun. Okay, so that was a great video, actually very catchy, as most of them are, but actually it explained a lot of what I'm going to explain in this section. Okay, so maybe you didn't catch that, maybe you want to rewind and go back and watch that video again after this session, and you guys will be like, wow, okay, I caught that, I got that. So go back, but here is the basic formula that you're going to see over and over again through college and so forth. So here is the chemical formula for, or chemical equation for photosynthesis. You have CO2, and in a balanced equation, that's why you have these numbers here, 6, 12, 6, and 6. But ultimately, the main components would be your carbon dioxide, but you have 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 12 molecules of water, H2O. Then, obviously, we're going in this direction with the aid of light, which we'll talk a lot about, sunlight, and plant enzymes. You produce glucose, 1 molecule, okay, and also 6 molecules of oxygen and 6 molecules of water, okay? But most importantly, and we'll talk about what happens on this side versus this side, but we're starting with CO2 and water, and ultimately we're ending up with energy in the form of glucose and oxygen. Lovely, right? So let's talk about this a little bit more in depth, like way depth. All right, so before we go into that, I love to kind of bring us back, and this is the entire unit. So we only have one more section after this, which will get down into this business, but there's a lot with photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Okay, moving on, the chloroplast, okay? The chloroplast is so important in photosynthesis because that is basically where it takes place. Let's go a little bit deeper though into the chloroplast. This is where photosynthesis occurs, okay? And I know most of you guys already know that. You've seen these little green things everywhere. I love pictures of them because actually under a microscope you can see these very clearly, okay? They're really cool. But they're these little organelles within plant cells only, okay? Animal cells do not have chloroplasts, okay? But this is where photosynthesis takes place. Let's look a little bit more at the structure itself. I wanted to kind of pull this up here. And this actually was in that video that we just saw. But here, and I'm going to show you yet another view in just a second. But here's the overall chloroplast. Okay, you have an outer membrane. You always have membranes. We'll talk about that next unit. Lots about that in the cell structure. But there's always membranes for protection purposes, for allowing certain things in and out. You have an outer membrane and an inner membrane. The stroma is basically kind of what is surrounding all of these thylakoids. Okay, the thylakoids are the main place where photosynthesis occurs. Okay, not just the chloroplast, but even more specific than the chloroplast. So a stack of thylakoids, so each one of these little pancakes, they do look like pancakes, you know, green pancakes, like green eggs and ham, green pancakes and ham. Okay, so each of these pancakes is a thylakoid. If you have a stack of them, you have a granum, okay? So again, here's it pointing to a thylakoid, you have a granum, and then the stroma is kind of what is in between. Okay, so just so you guys know a little bit more about the structure, here's yet another picture. I like to kind of make these pictures very simple, so whoever drew this, my kind of picture. Very simple. Structure of a chloroplast. Outer membrane, inner membrane, your thylakoid, your lamella, which basically connects the grana together. And then the lumen, the inside of the thylakoid, is where photosynthesis takes place. So you'll see some pictures in the videos that'll show kind of what that might look like. And then the granum would be the stacks of thylakoids, so your big tall stack of green pancakes. And then your stroma, all of what's in between. Okay? So there's your main structure of a chloroplast. Your lesson does a great job of talking about some of those structures a little bit more in depth, but know the main structures. So let's go a little bit smaller. So within the chloroplast, you have something called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is actually the little pigment, we talk about color. Pigment. So pigments absorb light. And I'm going to show you this video. It's going to say it a lot better than I will, although I'm going to follow it up with a little bit more. But listen to this video closely, because we could talk again for hours, because that's just me. I could talk for hours about anything. But we could talk hours about pigments and the light spectrum. So this video talks a little bit about it, why we see things as green versus, different colors, why we see black, because all the colors are actually absorbed. So listen closely and I'll talk a little bit more about it, but the chlorophyll is a pigment within the thylakoid.
As you probably know, the sun emits a wide spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. At one end of the electromagnetic spectrum are very high-energy gamma rays, X-rays, and ultraviolet waves. On the other end are longer wavelength, lower energy, infrared, micro, and radio waves. Visible light lies between these two ends of the electromagnetic spectrum and contains the wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation most useful to living organisms. What looks like white light reaching us from the sun is actually made up of many different colors corresponding to many different wavelengths. Visible light waves extend from the ultraviolet and blue range on one end into green, yellow, and red up to the edge of the infrared range on the other. Light striking a leaf can be reflected, transmitted through the leaf, or absorbed by it. The light reflected or transmitted by a leaf produces its color, while light that is absorbed heats up the leaf or drives biological processes like photosynthesis. In biochemical terms, pigments are any natural substance that occur in and color the tissues of an organism. Since chlorophyll, the key light-capturing molecule in photosynthetic membranes, is largely responsible for the green color of most plants, it is often referred to as a pigment. Other molecules, such as carotenoids and phycocyanins, are also often present in photosynthetic membranes, capturing light energy and transferring it to chlorophyll molecules. Carotenoids and phycocyanins are referred to as accessory pigments. Each pigment or accessory pigment absorbs and reflects different wavelengths of light. Chlorophyll absorbs violet, blue, and red light, but reflects green light, thereby giving leaves their green color. Carotenoids absorb blue and green light and reflect yellow and red, while phycocyanins absorb green and yellow and reflect blue or purple. During fall, it is the color of the carotenoids and phycocyanins made visible by the disappearance of chlorophyll that gives leaves their dramatic yellow, orange, red, and purple colors. As all wavelengths of light are absorbed to some degree by either chlorophyll, carotenoids, or phycocyanins, all wavelengths of light can drive photosynthesis to some extent. But the peak wavelengths lie in the blue and red regions of the visible light spectrum. Let's now look at the cellular structures, photosystems 1 and 2, that begin the process of converting light captured by pigments into chemical energy.
Okay, so much to talk about with that. That basically, again, why we see the colors that we do is because that particular color, take for instance these chloroplasts here that have the pigment of chlorophyll, it is basically reflecting the green wavelength, okay? And it's absorbing all of the other wavelengths. So you guys saw that spectrum, the visible light spectrum. Remember Roy G. Biv, some of you guys have heard that before, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Those are the visible light in the spectrum, and they all have different wavelengths, okay? The higher the wavelength, you're moving towards the ultraviolet and kind of those blue rays. The longer the wavelength or more towards the red part of the spectrum, okay? But so it just so happens that this pigment is actually absorbing everything but the green wavelength, and that's why we see that color. So black is actually that whatever is black is absorbing all of the wavelengths, so we don't see color, okay? It's very interesting to think about. There's so much we could talk about with that, but that gave you a little kind of indication of why leaves turn colors, and it's because basically that chlorophyll is going to be inactive in the wintertime. There's not photosynthesis taking place, so basically now we're starting to see the other pigments that already exist within that leaf, but there's so many chlorophyll with that green pigment that's what we're seeing. It's being reflected, okay? So anyways, back to some more stuff on chlorophyll. So basically, capture light energy. They're very important. It's a very important pigment, and you'll notice in your lesson it talks extensively about not only chlorophyll, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, but also the accessory pigments. Look into that. Definitely know that. I'm not going to test you heavily on that. Actually, I'm not even sure if I have a test question because this is biology, basically 101, and I don't want to go too in depth. I want you guys to get more of the bigger picture. So chlorophyll captures light energy, and it's going to transform that unusable sunlight, because really, you know, sunlight, what can we do with it other than bask in the sun? But it's going to transform that unusable sunlight energy into usable chemical energy. Very important concept there, okay? Now, here's our last video before we take a break of part 1. Here's to cooking. I love cooking. I hope you guys like cooking.
Bienvenue to the Chloroplast, one of the most exclusive restaurants found only in plants and a few politics. We are known for our choice of high-quality ingredients such as the purest and finest oxygen, water, and of course light. We even collect our own sunlight using chlorophyll. We use a secret technique taught to all of our cooks called photosynthesis to make you the finest meals of glucose you have ever eaten. Our kitchen called Stroma has the highest quality and ratings. Call early and you may be able to reserve seating in your choice of the outer, inner, or thylakoid membrane layers, especially the thylakoid membrane. This section of the chloroplast is stacked on top of each other. You can even watch as your sunlight gets absorbed. Au revoir. We hope to see you very soon.
How sweet, right? Okay, so we can kind of make everything wrap around cooking and eating because I love cooking and eating. But that is where we're going to stop for part 1. Part 2, we're going to come back for the stages. Okay, so join me again and we'll go over the stages of photosynthesis. Until then.